Hello and welcome to the Olive Tree Media webinar series. This is our September live event, and we're really pleased that you've joined us today. We're from Olive Tree Media, and we're a Christian media organization, and we create video resources and media that help people engage with the gospel and present the message of Jesus to people in unique ways. So I just want to welcome you from every classroom, every home, every church, every office, and we just are really glad that you're here with us today. We've invited our Stewart here today to talk about masculinity. There's a lot of talk in commentary, books coming out about this idea of masculinity. And is it toxic or can it be transformative? So we're hoping to talk to you about the current culture, the current conversation about masculinity, and to present you with what the Bible says about it and how we can show up in a way that's really transformative and in a way that really shapes our world in a wonderful way. So I welcome you today. My name's Ainsley Freeman, and I'm one of the team. And we just want to acknowledge the traditional custodians of all the lands that we're joining from. We thank you for their stewardship throughout generations on behalf of our Almighty Creator God. Now, if you can do us a favor while you're here, if you can like the video and also subscribe to our YouTube channel, that's a really helpful way of getting this message out to more people via YouTube, and we'd be really grateful for you to do that. So we're going to kick off now. I'm going to welcome Karl, and we're going to get started with today's webinar event.
Thank you, Ainsley. And, there's a bit of tension in the room across the Olive Tree Media team because Ainsley lives on the northern beaches and happens to go for that team called Manly. And Al, who we'll introduce in a moment, lives in the eastern suburbs. And I live in the Cronulla Shire. So we've got three of the teams in the NRL finals who are represented here. We promise not to tear each other apart. Other than Al and I both agree that... Manly, seriously, not a chance. What do you reckon, Ains?
Oh, wash your mouth out.
Well, thank you, Ainsley. It's great to have you introduce us, and great to have you with us. And welcome. Let me join Ainsley and welcome you to this webinar today, this live webinar. Listen, make sure you get on the chat. Let us know you're there. There's the opportunity to ask some questions of Al later on in the webinar. So go to the chat. Let us know you're here. Tell us where you're from, and then we'll get some questions from you as well. So let me just again introduce Al. Just following up what Ainsley has said. He's actually released this book called The Manual. The manual is Getting Masculinity Right, and having read this book, which was released in 2022, outstanding piece of research, outstanding piece of writing, and some great insight into the issue of men today in modern Western nations like Australia. And Al and I worked together on the men's series in 2010. People are still watching that show, and I'm sure, Al, because it's so good. Welcome, Al.
Thanks, Karl. Great to be with you, mate.
Hey, Al, tell me just a general question. Like, this is really a remarkable piece of research as well as writing. Do you know how many books you read for this, or in background?
I think I ended up with a stack of about 40 or so that I read.
Wow.
As I started to dig into it, I realized basically I know nothing. And so I read and read and read, and it is proof that anyone can write a book. So.
No, look, I know Al's here as a guest on the webinar, but to say it is brilliantly researched and done. It's a great job. So well worth reading and getting a hold of the manual, Getting Masculinity Right. And that's the topic of today. Thanks for coming in, Murray from Melbourne, and Ian from the Southport, and even someone else from the Sutherland Shire, also going for Cronulla to win, which is great news. Al, how has our culture changed in regard to masculinity? What's shifting? What's changing?
Well, massively. I guess you could say, I tell you where I do notice it. I've got three grown, married, very capable daughters, and the options that are available to them are just massively different to what was available for my mum. The girls they've been to university, they've got careers, they're into sport. There's just all sorts of things that is available to them. And so there's been this massive kind of opening of opportunities for women. And at the same time, I think in that couple of generations, say 30, 40 years, the masculinity thing has just been confused. Or actually worse than confused, I think devalued, maybe even you might say trashed. And that is so, now has it, if you want to dig down a little bit, has it been part of a organised conspiracy? No, but I did notice as I read more and more about this, as the academics, the activists and the advertisers have all played their part in that.
Yeah.
You want to drill down, I can show you easily see lots of ways in which masculinity's been devalued. Not sure where you want to go with that.
Yeah, I mean, interesting. One of the things you write in your book, and a lot of people kind of pick up, is the way men are shown or portrayed in either sitcoms, advertising, main media.
Yep. And you can see the change. Like if you, I grew up as a little boy watching the Brady Bunch. You're probably old enough to remember that.
Yep.
Mike Brady, permed hair, flares. It was the 70s. But he was part of the solution. The wise, thoughtful dad who cared for his family. Or Happy Days. Tom Bosley played Howard Cunningham, and he was a non-anxious presence. But by the time you get into the 80s, you've got Homer Simpson, or what's the one? Everyone Loves Raymond, and they're really just kind of just negative examples. They're idiots, and yet that's so much the common way that men are portrayed in sitcoms, etc. I mean, for years we let our toddlers watch Peppa Pig, where Peppa Pig's dad is, well, not surprisingly, a big fat useless pig. So we've kind of raised a generation of kids teaching that dad's an idiot and you don't need to listen to him.
Do you think, Al, it's one of the reasons that Bluey is popular? Because it actually gives...
Bluey's the exception to the rule.
Yeah.
Isn't it? Yeah. And kids love it. And what's Bluey's dad's name? Bandit. Bandit's an engaged, like useful, wise dad.
Yeah. So is it a way of saying why this is happening? Because you mentioned before, is this a conspiracy? Is it just a drift? What do you think?
I think there's a philosophical reason, if you like, and a physical reason. Let me try with the kind of philosophy of life. A lot of people with the megaphone voices in our culture now believe this whole kind of, I don't know what you want to call it, neo-Marxism or the identity politics or whatever, that the whole world is just oppressors or victims, and you're one or the other. Right? And you can see that through the lens of race or employment or whatever. But when you look at male, female, men have power, and we might come back to that. And just by being a bloke, you have certain power in relationships, bigger, stronger. Women are vulnerable because of motherhood, etc. And if you believe that, then one of the key things you'll be aiming to do is, I guess you could just be simple, emasculate men, take the power away from men. So I think there's people who are deliberately trying to undermine male power. And I think male power is not a bad thing if it's used the right way, which it's meant to be. And then there's a physical reason that, given the changes in our culture, that there's so few jobs now that really rely on just sheer physical strength, that we've lived in a really soft and safe culture for, well, the 80th anniversary of D-Day was a couple of months ago. So it's almost 80 years. There's almost no one alive in Australia that remembers a life-threatening conflict for the whole country. So you can devalue you devalue masculinity. Like, I think I can do this. I found this book fascinating, Manhood in the Making, by David Gilmour. He's a professor of anthropology. What he does is he wants to understand the role and the value that manhood plays in different cultures. So he went and interviewed a whole lot of different, or spent time with a whole lot of different cultures, particularly kind of pre-industrial cultures. Indians in South America, and a lot of time with the Maasai in Africa. And here's what he says at the end. He says, the harsher the environment and the scarcer the resources, the more manhood is stressed as inspiration and goal. Gender ideology reflects the material conditions of life. Now, we've lived in a culture, and it's a good thing, we've lived in a culture that's been so soft and so safe for everyone's lifetime, that it's been possible to devalue masculinity in a way that you couldn't do it in previous generations.
Yeah. It is interesting, isn't it? You mentioned this in your book, and I know that in some other reading I've done recently, there's an institute that gives out, the Carnegie Institute, it gives out awards each year for hero awards. And and there's one stat I saw, I think it was in 2022, they gave out 71 awards, 66% were given to men. And then the interesting thing is, and it's not because women don't do heroic things, it's just something that men lean into. Then if you go to 2001, there was a celebration of the 9/11 tragic situation in New York, the World Trade Center. And just last week, there was reflections on what happened in that event. Of the more than 1,000 first responders who died at 9/11, 99% were men. So that even though we live in a soft environment, there's still that space, but it seems that we undervalue that part of masculinity.
Yes. Yeah. I tell you what is interesting. I've seen the stats where the percentage of men who jump in physically and risk their lives to save someone is about the same percentage of the prison population being male.
Yeah.
So like there's a dark side to testosterone too. Jump in to risk your life to do something, or do the complete reverse. So men are capable of both, sadly.
And it's probably worth saying now that, and those that are listening to us have got a whole bunch of people. I'm a bit worried about Ashley, who's in Coffs Harbour, who's going, "Go the mighty storm." Ashley, I'm a bit concerned about your allegiances there, man. But good of you to be here. But that one of the issues that comes up a lot in this same area, is the domestic violence issue. And that masculinity has actually been equated now with toxic masculinity.
Yeah.
What's your thoughts there?
Well, it breaks your heart, doesn't it?
It does.
I think, not to be simplistic, I think what it is, when masculinity is devalued and men feel that kind of powerless, there's two wrong reactions that come, and they're kind of the complete opposite of one another. That is, men either drift away and give up and become totally passive. If you're looking for a book to read about that, Philip Zimbardo and Man Disconnected, where he talks about young guys who feel disconnected and powerless while they drift into the virtual world of video games and pornography because the real world's too hard. That's one wrong reaction. The other wrong reaction is kind of the chest thumping abuse that I'll show that I'm powerful. Andrew Tate and others. And so you can see they're both, neither of them are right reactions, but you can see why, and not that I have any sympathy at all for the abusive one, but you can see why those wrong reactions happen. As a Christian man, the Bible gives just such a better way than both of those.
Yeah. Let me come back to that. One of the things we've talked about, the wrong reactions, but also it sort of leans into that issue of what's what's happening, how's it affected men, how has this change affected young men? And I think one of the things that Al and I both watched in preparation for this, somebody told me about the SBS show on masculinity, and we both watched that, and the whole manosphere, as you mentioned, Andrew Tate. But there's something going on there that's why young men are leaning into that. What do you see as the effect? How has this shift affected men?
Well, if you don't know what or how you're supposed to live as a man, if you haven't got the role models or whatever, and you're looking around, you will end up. A lot of young guys will end up watching and listening and soaking up this. What do they call themselves? These buffheads, the war room, or
Yeah,
whatever.
that's it. Yeah.
Think seriously? Come on, grow up. But you can see young guys who are looking for the role models, and who am I and what am I? These guys are saying, you can have power and all the women and the money and the whatever. I want to reach in and grab them and slap them. But you can see the attraction of that.
Yes.
And I can also see the attraction of playing Fortnite and saving the world while you sit in your jammies in your mum's basement.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, so what am I? Part of the reason I wrote this book was that I speak to lots of men's groups, and a lot of young guys are really lost about, what I'm. In the one podcast I listened to, he said the right wingers will tell you be like your dad, hard and unemotional and whatever, and the left wingers will tell you be like your sister. Huh? There is a better way.
Yeah, and we're going to get to that better way. I mean, it is interesting that when you're confused and you're not sure what models you should follow, and the models that you see in the media don't seem to work, and you're told that the things that you naturally drift towards are a negative influence, you can see why people go to a simplistic response like the Andrew Tate's, can't you?
Yeah, simplistic. Yeah, absolutely. He's made a fortune out of monetizing this.
Yeah.
And we do need older men to step up and just take an interest in younger men.
Yeah. I mean, intriguing, isn't it, that one of the other things that's happening in Western nations, like Australia, America, the UK, Canada, is that Jordan Peterson turns up. He gets thousands of people turn up to his events, and most of them are young men.
Yes. I tried to get tickets when he spoke at the Sydney Opera House. They'd sold out in 5 minutes.
Yeah.
A 10,000 seat auditorium in Brisbane. It is interesting what his message is.
Yeah.
It's not being passive. It's not abusive. His message is, your life is hard. Get your act together and make life better for the people around you.
Yeah.
All these young men saying, "Oh, that's a good idea. Why didn't someone tell me that before?"
Reflect a little bit in the whole, being buried in your room on your computer on porn or gaming. Like, what are the flow-ons from that? Because clearly it's not good for the young man himself. Where is the flow-ons from that?
Do you mean what damage does it do?
Yeah.
Well, the video game thing does become addictive over time, and then you're less likely to engage in the real world. And so video game addiction is real. The pornography thing is even worse. And it's, what's the word? I think the word is ubiquitous. It's kind of everywhere now.
Yeah.
Zimbardo will outline, it actually starts to affect the way your brain works. And because pornography lights up the dopamine receptors in your brain and gets it really high, over time, continually pumping that up, your brain will actually readjust and decrease the dopamine levels, so that you need more and more stimulation to get that high, which is why guys get kind of sucked into more and more nasty stuff. And eventually there's even physical effects, like you're not actually able to have sex with a real woman. It grays out the rest of life. Now that's even what happens to the guy, well, young, not any male, I think, who watches the stuff. And as well as that, there's a whole industry that just churns and burns the people involved.
Yeah.
So it's
and then you also have that ongoing influences. If that's where men are being taught what sexual relationships are supposed to look like, what does that mean for young women who start to have a sexual relationship with a young man, and he assumes all this stuff about domination, about hitting, about even I saw an article a few months ago from the UK, a piece of research that basically said 50%, I think it was 50% of women believe that choking was a normal part of a sexual relationship. Now, that's crazy stuff.
Yep. Read about that too. That's been in our media as well. That the choking thing is kind of becoming mainstream.
Yeah. Listen, Petros, JW Petros has asked a question about Anglican boys, and I noticed he's from Victoria, and Ashley has put in an excuse for following the storm from Coffs Harbour because he's originally from Victoria. But so the Anglican boys' school in Victoria have a whole unit called positive masculinity, and what's been asked is how can we help young men be respectful and not lose that unique manly edge? Have you got is there a tension point there about being respectful and not losing a manly edge? I mean, how would you?
I think you show true manly edge when you are respectful.
Yeah.
So masculinity is all about how do you use the natural power that you have as a man? And how do you treat people with respect and gentleness? And it's truly actually the strong man who treats people gently and carefully.
Yeah,
I think that's what. And I've always thought you can tell the size of a man, I mean the size of his heart, by how he treats the little people, the people who aren't strong and powerful and can't do anything for him.
Yeah,
And,
I mean, just on.
I say the big way to teach boys respect is to model it.
Yeah. One of the interesting things I chatted to Al about, and this is not in, he doesn't refer to this book because the book I'm about to mention has come out recently, and it's by Richard Reeves of Boys and Men. And there's a 2-hour podcast where Richard Reeves is in a podcast discussing his book. But one of the things he actually says, and I think this gets at this question here, is that and I posted this on social media and got a bit of pushback. But the whole point was, he makes this point on the podcast: we treat men like malfunctioning women. Now, keep in mind, just let me say something about Richard Reeves while Al thinks about his response to that. That Richard Reeves is with the Brookings Institute as one of their lead researchers. And he writes the book not as somebody coming to the question ideologically. He comes at the question from a research point of view. He's basically saying, this is what the research tells us about how men and boys are going at the moment. And basically the news is pretty much, I was going to say all bad. That's a bit strong, but it's not good. But his point is that this whole, we've made the greatest virtues within the community, the attitudes and behaviors that women most normally gravitate towards, and then we're expecting that of men. So Al, do we treat men as malfunctioning women?
I think I've listened to that podcast, and I bought the book. It's on the shelf. I've got to read it. Tell me about it. Do we do that? We do certainly try to emasculate. I think emasculate men. And why? Well, I guess it's partly, that some men do misuse that power they have. Some men are sexual predators. And so it's kind of emasculate men. It's certainly at the level of boys and schooling.
Yep.
So Leonard Sachs, SAX, has written several books. I read them about boys and schooling and why gender is important. And the way, it's not a conspiracy, but the way our schooling is set up, it absolutely favors girls, particularly at the beginning, rather than boys. And boys are much more likely to think, oh, well, then I'm dumb, I give up in terms of the academic thing. So I think we treat boys in schooling a bit like malfunctioning girls. How much men later? I do know that we hose down a lot of masculine traits. And I'll just say it. I think our churches are guilty of it often.
That's true.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, interesting in this area, there was some research done by major articles written in the Sydney Morning Herald, which seem to suggest that, you know, if you go to the men question, that one of the problems with domestic violence was, you know, the biblical teaching on men having, you know, power or having authority and misusing that. I was actually quoted in one of the articles as disagreeing with it. Al, what's your experience in that area? I mean, we don't want to glorify the misuse of power.
If you read a little bit further and drill down, the men who are most likely to be involved, and US research, the men who are most likely to be involved with domestic violence were those who were very much on the fringe of Christian churches, but didn't regularly attend. And so would misuse or use the headship and submission idea as a cliche. What the research does show is those who are committed Christian men and regular at church are much less likely to be involved with that. Mm-hmm. Because if you actually read the New Testament, what the New Testament tells men to do, husbands, is to lay down their life to love and care for her and serve her. Right?
Yep.
And the wife's called on to respond happily to that.
Yeah.
But and there's absolutely no place for domestic violence or abuse of any sort in our churches.
Yeah.
In fact, one of the things I've just done in my job is to push along and supervise our anti-domestic violence policies across the churches I work for.
Yeah. We're going to come back to Al in a minute. And Al's already got somewhere towards Dorothy's question about men holding power respectfully. And Ron's asked about John Eldridge, Wild at Heart, and Al's going to come back and mention that. So, hey, keep those questions coming and we'll respond to the ones we can. But here is your big moment. I forgot to mention this at the beginning. We are releasing a new series called Encounter, People Who Met Jesus Then and Now. And that's going to be released on the 24th of October. We're going to send you an email where you can actually watch the launch of Encounter. But this is for the first time publicly shown. So all of you that are here with us, even Storm supporters, get to watch the trailer. This has just been finished this morning. And here's the trailer for our new series, Encounter.
When Jesus walked the earth, he had encounters with people seeking God. He reached out to the desperate and the outsiders.
People often reject the idea of God or the supernatural.
I knew I wanted a deeper life, as millions of people do.
The reason I believed Christianity was true was I didn't want it to be. I went looking for Buddhism because I thought it would suit me. I went looking for Wicca because I thought it would suit me. I went looking for things I was interested in. But Christianity, or specifically Christ, came to me without me looking for them.
There was a sense deep inside of me, a real hunger or desire for something else. And I knew it was spiritual.
The question, therefore, is not, is there a God? But it's, what is that God like? And as Christians, our answer is Jesus.
Encounters with the divine aren't just strange or unusual ancient stories. They are part of modern life.
There was something about Jesus that made a tax collector get up, stop what he was doing, and immediately follow Jesus.
I don't think every demon in hell could have stopped me from wanting and getting what was on offer from Jesus Christ.
Who knew in the middle of your life, God willing, that such an encounter could still be available to you?
I feel like God's made sense of everything that I've been through in my life.
I heard this voice as a living voice, but I knew that something was happening, that I wasn't alone in my room reading this.
Yeah.
You know, that there was a divine presence.
There is no way to argue that against that this man met God and God has changed his life.
But I kind of called him out and I was like, God, you know, now's your chance. Like, if there was ever a time, it's now. And I was like, say something, move something, like anything. And yeah, he did.
How did that change you?
It changed everything.
We traveled the world and talked with a diverse group of people, from a professor to a gay activist, an environmentalist to a drug addict, a journalist to a criminal. They all had a life-changing encounter with Jesus.
That's the difference, because beforehand it was religion, it was religious. But then when I had that encounter, there was a supernatural encounter where he invaded within inside me and took over.
She came up behind him and touched the edge of his cloak, and immediately her bleeding stopped.
Her life is completely different.
Christ isn't somewhere distant, the other side of Pluto. He's nearer than my own breath.
Join us as we travel across the globe, uncovering encounters with Jesus that transformed lives then and now.
If sin doesn't matter, the cross is irrelevant. But if sin is this kind of spiritual cancer destroying our world, and you can't go to a doctor or a shrink or a politician or an influence to get it sorted, where do you go? 2.6 billion people in our world say, you go to Jesus Christ, who died on the cross.
Our hope is that you too may encounter Jesus and find faith, hope, and life.
Now, I'm biased, but that's beautiful. So we're really looking forward to that series getting out, 10 episodes, about 28 minutes each episode, looking at 10 interactions, encounters that Jesus had with people in the New Testament, and then looking at encounters today across the globe of people who have met and encountered Jesus and had their lives radically changed. You're going to love the series. It's you can, when we get to the end, we're in the email and in the feed, there will be an opportunity for you to be able to log in and watch the launch of 4th of October, and it's going to be great. It's a fabulous series. I know you're going to love it, and it's going to be used across Australia in gospel ministry. So moving on from encounter, which I'm reluctant to do, but I will do, and back to Al. Al, one of the questions that we were asked before was that the question about John Eldridge and Wild at Heart. Now, that's been around a fair while now. Any thoughts on John Eldridge and Wild at Heart? Because if you went back probably 10 to 15 years, that was talked about a lot and referred to a lot.
Yeah, I just happen to have a copy.
Okay.
You did just like on my shelf within reach.
Well done.
Yeah. It's very American. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but the American stuff doesn't always cross into our culture perfectly. What he's aiming to do, and I've got real empathy for him, he's aiming to actually reverse this emasculation that can happen in churches. And our churches very often are set up and appeal to women rather than men. What worries me, though, is he says the Christian life will be this great adventure. You know, what every man wants is a battle to fight, a beauty to rescue, and an adventure to live, okay? The trouble is, when you become a Christian as a man, life's often very ordinary. Life's about getting up and going to work to support your family. Life's about driving your kids to sport. Life's about... And often I'll talk to groups of men about Groundhog Day, like the same stuff again and again and again and again, and every head in the room nods. And so I want to say, yes, following Jesus is an adventure, but not quite in the way John Eldridge gets us to expect. There's a fair bit of loving the people around you by just turning up again and again and again and again. So, yep, I love what he's trying to do, but I just say, yep, adventure, yes, but expect Groundhog Day as well.
Al, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I think a lot of Western Christianity and Australian Christianity, and especially Protestant Christianity, how do I say this? A lot of your faith is sort of focused on your head. It's what you think. It's sort of intellectualized. And
Yes.
it's really interesting to see in some other nations like the Philippines and a few other places like that, where they carry, a statue, an idol, which we clearly are not as enthusiastic about, through the streets, and then all men doing the carrying. So if there's something sort of physical and blokey to do, and it's connected to our faith, we're all there. But if it's just turning up singing songs that often are Jesus and My Girlfriend songs, and it's all kind of inside your head, it doesn't fit easily with your average bloke, does it?
Yes, Karl, you tapped in. Man, you've tapped into some energy here from me. We want to be word centered. That's how we know God, and not through statues, etc. We want to be word centered. But a lot of blokes who are intelligent, bright, etc., like, for example, my brother, is brilliant at making things, build anything. They're not readers. And we need to work hard at getting at how do we get guys who aren't naturally readers engaged with the word. And those of us who preach need to actually preach to men as well. So, but also, how do we get blokes who are good with their hands and stuff to actually be involved in serving and caring? And, one of my mates down the South Coast ran this thing with the tradies in his church. They called it, there was a TV show, Backyard Blitz. They started this thing called Backyard Blessing. And they would actually go to the home of a single mum or a pensioner or whatever and totally redo the yard on a Saturday. And it's just a way that blokes who aren't literary types can kind of lean into caring for people and looking after them. So, I'm with you there. We need to be able to talk to men, and in a way that blokes who aren't, how would I put it? Literary types can understand. I mean, Jesus spent half his life working on building sites. He could do it.
So what is masculinity? I mean, this is getting to that question, and we're sort of dancing around it, and we've answered it, etc. But if you were to try and give some sort of approach, if there's if this seminar is full of young blokes in their early 20s or in their mid-teens, and they're saying, so what is it to be a bloke?
Yep.
What do we do?
All right, let me say something really controversial. You ready? I'll probably get cancelled for saying this, but there's men and there's women, or there's male and female, and it's binary, okay? Chromosomes, men, women, that's binary. But gender is about the social or relational way that men express being men and women express being women. Right? And there's a great variation in that. So you've got men and women as binary, but gender, the way that men express being masculine, the way that women express being feminine, there's all sorts of variations, okay? We went to Egypt as tourists, and these big burly Egyptian blokes, when they meet each other, they kiss each other on both cheeks. Now, it's going to be weird in the culture I grew up in, but, man, there was nothing feminine about what they were doing. So there's that variation there. So if masculinity is the way that men behave, okay, there's kind of cultural markers for that, and it varies from culture to culture. Now, I'm happy to go back to that if you like, but when you look at what the Bible expects, the Bible speaks to us as individuals, yes, but as individuals in relationship. So a man might be, well, every man started off as a son. A man might be a friend. You may be a husband. You may be a father. You may be, a grandfather, which is fun. You'll be a workmate, etc. And then the Bible will tell you in each of those relationships, how should you act? So when you start to put those pieces together, you get a picture of what does the Bible expect of masculinity? How is it that men are supposed to react? Supposed to act in relation to other people. And I'll tell you what I found. I went through every one of those relationships I could find, and in every one of them, it's just assumed that men have power, the ability to affect other people. whether it's just as a young man because you're strong, you're physically strong, an older man because you have the power of example and influence, the power that you have as a husband, how you treat your wife, the obvious power you have as a father. In every one of those, the New Testament writers say, yeah, you have this power, be very careful how you use it.
Mm.
So my working definition is masculinity is about a willingness to take responsibility and use the power you have to love and nurture and care for people.
Mm.
And men will do that in all sorts of different ways, but it's a willingness to step up, take that responsibility.
It seems to me that we often get that wrong when we pull that into suggesting that it's actually about authority and being able to exert authority over other people, like your wife or your children. And the interesting thing is that those places where the Bible talks about a relationship between a husband and a wife, if a man is meant to lead, he's meant to be lead as the one with the greatest servant heart,
yep,
like Jesus gave himself for the church. So, you know, to focus on authority sort of misses a point, doesn't it?
There's kind of there is authority there, but it's with a massive amount of responsibility, right? To take the initiative to love and look after and care for her, etc. And that's a husband's job. And then, for example, in a marriage, then a wife's called on to respond willingly to his love and care. I think that's the way to put it. So, yeah, the idea of being a little tin pot dictator, it's absolutely not there. You've got a responsibility to love her, care for her, look after her, etc. And I don't know many women who would be happy with that.
Yeah. Al, we chatted about some questions, and this is one slightly without notice. One of the things you mentioned before was men and friends. And men having friends. And we, in Encounter the series, we interviewed Sheridan Voisey, who's put a thing together called the Friendship Lab, where he's looking at friendships. And men and friends are an interesting space, isn't it? Because it would seem that a lot of men pretty much don't have friends.
Yeah, loneliness is a real problem. And not just for crusty old blokes like me, ironically for the young, Gen Z, etc. as well.
Yeah.
And so often I think men are not good at making friends. And I gather statistically, women are much more likely to have a close friendship network. A little bit hard to work out why. I mean, there's the old cliche that men have got to be, hard and all self-sufficient and all of that stuff. I guess that's too often the default position. Well, it certainly was with baby boomers. Yeah. Now I know that there's been initiatives like the Men's Shed movement that's around Australia, run by different councils. That seems to have done some good. But just a place that blokes can turn up and pretend to do, woodwork or something manual, when really the idea is to have friendship and talk to other blokes.
Yeah.
And if I could say, our churches ought to be working on that too, to give the opportunity for men to spend time together that's not awkward.
Yeah, and the interesting thing is that one of the reasons that's important, I mean, clearly it's good for people to have friends, but as you would know from your reading and research, men do damage to themselves, in other words, taking their own lives, at a much higher percentage than women. And then there was another stat that, as I said, Richard Reeves put in his work, which was if you're an older male who is divorced, your chances of taking your own life increase eightfold. And it would suggest that these men are totally isolated. And in fact, Richard Reeves, who again is American, quoted some Australian research, and the Australian research about the men who are older men who are isolated, who felt that they were, wanted to do damage to themselves. When they asked them to describe themselves, the two words that they used most were hopeless and useless, worthless and useless. So that that's never going to have a good outcome. And if there's a whole bunch of, if it was men or women, but if there's a whole bunch of men out there who feel that they are worthless and useless, how do we get past that?
Yeah, actually, the suicide stats are very troubling. 75% of suicides are male. Apparently, as you look at it, women will attempt suicide perhaps more often than men, but men really get the job done because men go for violent ways of killing themselves. It's the leading cause of death for 18 to 44-year-olds now. But the stats, what you say is exactly right. The stats drop off a little bit after that, but then when you get to old age, men start killing themselves again at higher numbers. What do you do? Part of what I've been trying to say is that men can make a big difference in the world, even those who I feel useless. You're able to make a difference in the part of the world that really matters to you, right? With the people that you know and where you live. And so that's a message that you can really make a difference, and that's what men want to do. It's interesting, Jordan Peterson's thing about you want to make a difference in the world, start making your bed, tidy up your bedroom. It's like start small and you can make a difference. I think that's the case. And I keep coming back. That's where Christian churches have so much to offer as a community of people who are able to care for one another, look after one another, where there's huge opportunity to make a difference in the lives of people.
Yeah. One of Ross has made the point, the stats are fine, but what are the strategies to change? That's the question. And Ross is absolutely right. And what you're getting at, Al, is finding spaces where you matter and finding spaces where you can take what you have. But it does take the wider community to actually look and watch and see where they can include men who might be a bit older and isolated into the life of the community or a family, or to use what they have and to look out for them.
Yes, yeah. And in the big city, we're very easily isolated. It's taken us a long time here to get to know our neighbours. Like we live side by side, but people are isolated. Ironically, the closer we live, the more we seem to be isolated.
Yeah, it is. And so, I mean, it's clearly getting over that isolation. And Ross's point's a great point, but there's no kind of easy answers to this. But continuing the trajectory you're on at the moment is not a good outcome for men or for boys, and we need to be active in those areas. Let me just say, as an aside, if you're listening to this as live with us now or the replay later, and you do feel like you feel in danger of yourself, make sure you get some help. Go to Lifeline, go to places that you can get some assistance. Don't stay in that hopeless space. Find the person that that will care for you and give them a call and be clear about how you're going. And if you know somebody that you're concerned about, as other people say, on an ongoing basis, ask how they are. Let's not just leave people isolated and alone. One of the other key issues that seem to come through the research is fatherless boys, Al, and the high percentage of males who end up fatherless. How do you see that playing out?
Yeah, I think it's Jonathan Haidt's book on the boy crisis. He lists page after page after page of studies that show the difference that fathers present and engaged make compared to boys growing up without dads. Our society has many more now single mums than used to be the case. And I'm not having a go at single mums. It's just a really tough gig. And so it's we need dads around and we need dads engaged. If there isn't a dad in the home, it'd be a great thing for men who can see that to actually be involved. Or I'd encourage single mums to see if they can find a man who's trustworthy, who'll be around to be engaged with the boys. I I heard Andrew Scipione, who was the previous police commissioner here in New South Wales, say his dad died when he was early teens, and it was the men in the local Baptist church who kind of stepped up and took a real interest in him that made a massive difference in his life. So he talks about that very clearly.
Yeah.
So yeah, every study ever done shows the difference that men make in the lives of kids in the home.
Yeah, and we all know that family life doesn't always work out the way we'd planned, and there are times where families split up. And I had some experience with a few different people where it was very difficult for them as a dad to maintain involvement in their kid's life. But if I can use this term, some mates I know really fought for that in the most positive sense of that word. I don't mean that they were, unhelpful or inappropriate, but they basically kept turning up. And so if you're a dad out there, keep turning up, because your kids really need you, and both girls and boys need a dad in their life. And so it's just so significant to as a dad, take that responsibility, and even in difficult family circumstances, find ways of still being involved in your kids' lives. And as Al said, if you see a mum where the dad isn't around and she's got some kids, just there's that great opportunity to support them as well. Is there any kind of pieces you want to put about masculinity lived out in practice, Al? Where do you see that for you personally that you might have just repeat some of the things you've already said, but is there anything you want to add in that space?
Here's this interesting. My little definition of masculinity: a willingness to step up and take responsibility and use the power you have to care for and nurture people. When I've spoken about that a while ago, some of the guys who were in the audience said, "Wait a minute, how's that different to what a woman would do?" A woman's called to do that in the New Testament. And I had to think about it. Yes, but a woman's much more likely to do that than a man. Two answers. One is why? Well, I think women are much more likely to do that. And also biologically, a woman is much more, if I could say, a woman's locked into motherhood in a way that a man is not locked into fatherhood. And a man actually needs deliberately to choose that. And so that men need to hear that and make that decision. And the other thing is men will do that in masculine ways. The way that a father cares for his kids is different to the way that a mum does.
Yeah.
If you just watch a dad wrestle with his kids, everyone loves it madly. I don't know many mums who wrestle with their kids. There's just a different way.
Yeah.
For me personally, at the moment, my dad's 87. He lives up the North Coast. Part of my obligation as a son is now how am I going to try and keep looking after him. It's complicated, but that's, there's one relationship that I need to step up and try and be proactive with.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Al, you're involved in local church leadership, and many of the people watching us today will be involved in churches as in attenders or have leadership roles. Is it just a matter of starting a men's group, or like what are the ways that churches can help support men within their congregations?
Well, I mean, a men's group is pretty simple to start, and that'll certainly do some good. How do you provide spaces for men to get together and to be able to speak honestly and confidentially with one another in a way that's not awkward or weird? I think that's the key to it. And especially get them to read the Bible and talk about what Jesus expects of men who would follow him. And look, I'll say men-only spaces are different to mixed gender spaces. I don't know what an all-women's space is like by definition, but a men-only space is different. And I do think you need opportunities for men to be with groups of men only in church life. And you can do that fairly efficiently, and that is, early on a Saturday morning, an hour or whatever. It doesn't have to even be a really long time. You know, that the best men's group I was involved in ever was from 8 till 9 on a Wednesday night. We'd arrive, look at the Bible, what to pray about, bang, you get it all done, gone. Which all sounds very blokey, but it was great. And you could be out of the house and then back again before anyone even kind of missed you. So I just think start with the men's group and see what's going to happen.
Yeah. And it's that whole notion of being proactive in this space. And I think as we wrap this up, Al, is to say that when we created the men's series in 2010, one of our motivations was that there wasn't much out there for men. And the intriguing thing is that 14 years later, what we see is that there's still not a lot out there for men, but also you've now got a greater crisis for men. And one of the things that a lot of these writers, like Richard Reeves and many of the others are writing about is the fact that you've got governments who have departments who are looking after young women, looking after women, looking after women's spaces. There's not too many government departments where they're, focused on what are the issues for men. When men were low in STEM, science, technology, engineering, and maths, they actually produced programs to make sure they lifted the number of women in those STEM courses. And yet men in the kind of humanities and health and education, they're quite low and continue to be low, but nobody's starting a program for them. So there needs to be a bit more focus.
Yeah, and it's not a zero-sum game.
No.
Like, it's not as if you want to lift women up, you want to lift men up, you've got to pull women down. Not at all. Both men and women can flourish.
Yep.
It's interesting. We made the men's series, was it 14 years ago?
Yep.
The word toxic was not mentioned in 11 programs.
Yeah.
Things have changed in that time. So, yeah.
Yep. Al, really appreciate. Make sure you get a copy of Al's book, the manual. It's a great book. It's a great read. It's really helpful. A little upfront for everybody. Al and I are actually talking again about a men's series for next year. So look out for that. We're looking to film that because we both believe it's a huge issue. We both believe that 14 years between a new program is too long, and we're going to do it. So Al, thanks for being with us. I really appreciate your input today.
Great to be here, mate. Thank you.
Good on you. Hey, just a few things as we wrap up. There's prayer for media. If media is on your heart, work like Olive Tree Media and others. There's a prayer for media on the 27th of October. Pray for Media Day. We're going to put the link in the emails and in the chat. So if you want to pray for media, and the 27th, that's Christian media, the 27th of October is the opportunity you can join people around the world praying for media. Make sure you do that. Stu Harris, who's in the background helping us today, as he does with all our webinars, a story strategist is his organisation. He's key involved in Pray for Media. So make sure you support what they're doing there. And the series launch of Encounter, it's on the 24th of October. If you want to go online and watch it online, make sure you register. We'd love to have you with us. Encounter is a beautiful series, as you saw in the trailer, and we're looking forward to releasing it on the 24th of October and seeing it used across the world to bring Jesus' name and to remind people that they can all, anywhere, have an encounter with Jesus still. Make sure you like our YouTube channel, and that way you get notifications. So go to the Olive Tree Media YouTube channel and get notifications. On our website, olivetreemedia.com.au, you can go to a Watch Plus platform, and when Encounter comes out, you can watch Encounter on the Watch Plus platform, but you can see everything we've ever produced on the Watch Plus platform. Faith Runs Deep, Jesus the Game Changer, 1, 2, and 3, even Towards Belief, and the men's series is all on the Watch Plus platform. So make sure you check that out. But also we send the Daily Nudge. The Daily Nudge is played on radio stations all across Australia and New Zealand, but it's also sent to people's inbox on a Monday to Friday, totally for free. And it's a way to be encouraged with a devotion every morning. So if you go to olivetreemedia.com.au, register for the Daily Nudge. We'd love to send you the Daily Nudge. Thank you for being with us. Thank you for all of those people who have joined us across Australia, basically. And for those of you who've watched the replay, we trust this has been enormously helpful for you. For men, we trust that you've deepened your faith, grow in your relationships with your family, and learn and grow and learn what it is to be a follower of Jesus and to be a male. We trust that you've been with us. We thank you for being with us. We trust that you've enjoyed this. See you next time.